I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today, we meet Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes, PAVE, P-A-V-E. Concerned parents are rising up against the deadly conspiracy and predatory practices by big business to attract children to vaping and the highly addictive drug nicotine. The founders of PAVE, represented by Meredith Berkman, have a mantra: big tobacco messed with the wrong moms. What a great mantra. Let's meet our guest and hear the story of PAVE. Meredith, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you for appreciating that mantra. Yes, I am one of the wrong moms. We started this group, I and my co-founders, Dorian Furman and Dina Alessi, and joined very soon after by our fourth partner, Mimi Boblik. This group started around my kitchen table because one day in April of 2018, my son, who was then 16, came home from school to talk to me and my husband about what he referred to as a, quote, mixed message anti-addiction talk that had happened at his New York City high school. He was in ninth grade. He had just started at a new school. And this is one of these talks where the teachers and administrators leave the room, so kids will speak freely about sensitive topics. And as he described to us that night, when the other adults left the room, this supposed educator began talking to these teenagers about Juul. Now, back in April of 2018, I have to say, I'm not even sure I'd ever heard the word Juul. Maybe I'd heard the word e-cigarette, but almost every child in that room was either Juuling, as it was called, wildly addicted to Juul, or knew someone who was. And this man began telling the kids that Juul was for adults, not for them, but it was, quote, totally safe. And according to my son, Caleb, every time he said, it is not for you kids, it's for adults, he would repeat, but it's totally safe. And he also told them that it was, quote, 99.9% safer than traditional combustible cigarettes, and that this product would be receiving FDA approval, quote, any day. So my son, being a natural skeptic, went up to this supposed educator at the end of this assembly, along with Dorian's son and Dina's son, and they began to ask more questions. And that is when, as my son reported to me that night, that this adult took out a Juul, showed these boys how it worked, and called it the iPhone of vapes. Now, you can imagine that when my son told me this story, my husband and I, we were horrified. And I called Dina and Dorian. I mean, this was a new school. They were really the only two moms that I sort of was friendly with and knew. And I asked if they had heard the same thing, and they had not. They called back 5 minutes later. Yes, our boys just reported the same. And within 24 hours, what we discovered, and I'm a former journalist, but what we discovered was that, in fact, this supposed educator who had come in through the outside group was a representative for Juul, and that the school had no idea. And this was our aha moment. So over like the days, weeks, even months that followed, my friends and I began researching, like, what is this Juul? And what we discovered about this company was so shocking. We realized that the company had been targeting not only our kids in school, but everybody else's kids through the use of social media marketing on platforms where kids were, but adults were not, by hiring young-looking influencers, and as we then learned more about the product, by the use of flavors in this stealth by design product. Now, as we started speaking to anyone who would talk to us, we started with our pediatricians and child psychologists, et cetera, and we started putting the pieces together. We were also terrified, but what we very quickly realized was the prevalence of this problem. And it's a problem that would not be called the youth vaping epidemic for another 9 or so months, when it was dubbed that by federal officials, including the then Surgeon General, the then head of FDA's Tobacco Products Center, the then Health and Human Services Secretary. And so there was this sense of, well, wait a minute, like, we have to do something. So we decided we would join what we hoped was out there, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving of vaping, only to discover that because it was so early, this did not exist. And as I sometimes like to joke to my partner's dismay, we're the three, necessary idiots who had to start the group that frankly, we would have probably been happier to join. And so essentially we decided we would create a website and launch it the day after Labor Day of 2018. And that was it. We would just warn parents like us about this big problem, about this predatory company. But from literally the day that we went live, we paid one of my older kids' friends to, make a website. We're just moms. I don't know how to make a website. And so we were flooded with emails from the very first day from parents all around the country who were desperate to understand what this product was and why it was so addictive to their children and how they could get help. And that's how Parents Against Vaping, the organization that is both an education and advocacy nonprofit, was formed.
Wow, that's a great story. And I'm looking forward to getting in depth on what you're doing. After a short break, we'll continue our conversation with Meredith Berkman. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening, our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking about vaping, a dangerous epidemic that's unleashed terrible harms on youth with lifelong health consequences. Meredith, continue the story, please.
Well, I'll just tell you a little bit more of the story, and then I want to really talk about what you said, the harms, why these are so destructive for youth. We made a strategic decision actually on the day that we learned about this, and we'll never know how or why, but intuitively, we decided that while we had to take action and to realize soon after that we would have to help change the laws to protect kids and that we would focus on the flavors, because at that time, Juul was selling, creme brulee and cool cucumber, and we can go into the flavors part of the addictiveness later. We decided that we would not share publicly the story of Juul in the school, which was so shocking and so damaging and harmful to, we thought, to Juul's reputation. We wanted to wait for maximum impact. And so there's an email where I wrote to my partners and said, we're going to wait until we have the right moment. And that will be when we testify before Congress. So we started talking to anyone. We got on the train to Washington with our boys and, schlepped them everywhere and talked to people. And we're trying to say, like, Houston, we have a problem. But it wasn't until July of 2019 when we and our sons testified before the House Subcommittee on Economics and Consumer Policy that was then chaired by Raja Krishnamurthy, Democrat of Illinois, and where Senator Dick Durbin also spoke, and many others also testified, that I think people suddenly understood this was a company that was going after kids. But why were they going after kids and how? I will say that one of the things that Juul did, and we talk a lot about Juul because Juul kicked off the youth vaping epidemic. They opened this public health Pandora's box that because of regulatory delays and failures and enforcement failures, we've not been able to close because so many bad actors have followed Juul. there were two industry standards that Juul created. One was the use of nicotine salts, which are allowed this e-cigarette, which was stealth by design and tech chic, to contain enormous amounts of nicotine, so much more than is in combustible cigarettes. In fact, one Juul pod contained as much nicotine as at least a pack and a half of cigarettes. So they changed the industry standard, right? So you've got so much nicotine and directly delivered to the brain, so much more potent, so much more addictive. That's number one. And then the second, the second part of the industry standard was directly, using social media and flash to addict kids. And when you realize how much nicotine we're talking about, and when you realize how harmful nicotine is and how difficult it is to quit, and when you look at how harmful it is specifically for developing brains and developing lungs. Now, kids' brains, I think I developed till I think about 26. I think the lungs until 25 or 26. And we have known for decades what nicotine does. It reprograms developing brains for further addiction. That's why it's often referred to as a gateway drug. So kids, their prefrontal cortex, the impulse control center, is directly impacted by the addiction to nicotine. Nicotine also can cause permanent cognitive change. It can elevate anxiety and depression. So when you realize that, and you think about the fact that the Surgeon General, has it's been very clear, we are living through an adolescent mental health crisis. The youth vaping crisis is colliding with that. It's like a perfect storm of pain and harm for these kids. When you think about what nicotine is doing to the developing lungs of our kids, they are sucking so deep into their lungs at very high heat, known toxins, which are in these flavors, and by the way, these flavors include menthol, which Juul kept on the market. And so they were sucking all of these toxins that were known and unknown, because at such high heat, some of the things that are in these vapes, like formaldehyde and degraded metal from the device itself, they can combine a third unknown toxin. So every single day, there's more emerging evidence, right, that these products are causing cardiovascular harm. They're increasing the severity of asthma. There have been dozens and dozens and dozens ongoing reports of seizures related to possibly nicotine poisoning. And of course, there are reports of EVALI, which is e-cigarette caused sort of unknown lung injury. And those were followed by the CDC until COVID. The majority of those were caused by vitamin E acetate, a thickening agent in cannabis, but not all. There have been thousands upon thousands, something like last year, 32,000 cases of EVALI across this country. And while many of them may have been caused by cannabis, there are thousands potentially that are caused by young people using e-cigarettes.
Wow, we're going to take a short break and then continue our conversation about the risks of vaping. See you all after the break.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here. Wait. What?
I can't drive.
Why? My. Oh.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're with Meredith Berkman talking about vaping and how massive media misinformation created a dangerous epidemic that affects every parent and teen in America. Meredith, please continue your story.
Well, I guess what I want to make clear is, the tobacco industry has endless amounts of money, and they're great at spin. And one of the things we found is, if you look at the numbers, the industry will tell you that, all cases of EVALI, every single one was about cannabis. Not true. And they know that. And they'll say, oh, the youth vaping epidemic, it's no longer an epidemic. Well, that's also not true, because just a couple of weeks ago, we got the gold standard of scientific surveys on this, the National Youth Tobacco Survey for 2023. While thankfully it showed a decline in use among high school students, there are still 2.1 million middle and high school students who are vaping on a regular basis, at least a quarter of them daily. And you'll have to fact check me on this, but I think it was something like 32% of those, something like that, using these products on 20 out of the last 30 days. So when you put those two together, that suggests great levels of addiction to nicotine. You also have to realize that the CDC over the summer came out with a survey showing that 10% of all young adults in this country between the ages of 18 and 24 are vaping on a regular basis. The majority of them, I'll say the majority of them regularly, many of them on a daily basis. Now, tobacco law, under the tobacco laws now, that anyone who is below the age of 21 is considered a minor in terms of tobacco sales. So we're talking about millions of minors, of kids, people who are under the law, over 18, maybe an adult, but not when it comes to tobacco, who are using these products. And I just want to say, we have to remember that but for the introduction of Juul in late 2015, early 2016, and so many of the companies that have followed, companies like Puff Bar, and now all of these disposable Chinese brands that are flooding in through the ports, including Elf Bar, which FDA says is the most popular among kids. And all of these so easily accessible to kids, despite so many of the laws that my group and our partners have helped to change. I mean, we're focused on ending sales of flavored tobacco products, all flavored tobacco products. Why? Because flavors hook kids. That is the initiator. And that includes menthol, and that includes menthol cigarettes, which the tobacco industry has, perpetrated for decades, a targeting of communities of color. That's why Black smokers, Black males have the highest levels of death from cardiovascular disease. There are many comorbidities, but the targeting of Black smokers through menthol is certainly one of them. So I just want to reiterate, we're talking about millions of young people, a generation that otherwise would not have been initiated into tobacco use. And we know that because smoking rates in this country among youth were the lowest they had ever been, below 6%. Before Juul came on the scene. But another thing I really want to talk about is the importance of parents and the role that they can play in combating this ongoing adolescent public health crisis. We don't speak to kids. Even my own kids don't want to hear from me. I have 4 kids. They don't want to talk to me either, except for that one day, which was great. And that started me on this journey. We talk to parents. And we focus on educating parents in Spanish and English about the harms of youth tobacco use and about the predatory nature of the tobacco industry and its plying of, using these flavored products and going after young people and priority populations. And so the most important thing that parents can do is educate themselves. I would ask anyone listening to go on our website, www.parentsagainst.vaping.org, and school yourself, teach yourself, read about what nicotine can do to your child's developing lungs, to their developing brains, understand what these products are, what do they look like, what are the latest products, how many kids are doing this. We also have information about signs your child may be vaping. Suddenly, constantly going into the bathroom or going outside, bloody noses, a sweet smell that you can barely you can barely see. A kid who is, a great student suddenly is failing everything at school, punching walls. I mean, some of these things may be part of adolescence. Adolescents are not always easy, but we're really talking about extreme change in behavior. And we also want parents to understand, we want to empower parents to create change by, if they feel comfortable, approaching their local elected officials or even their federal elected officials through our website, explaining that these flavored products must be fully regulated, which they still are not because of FDA's delays, and that flavored products must be taken off the market to protect our kids.
We're going to take a short break, and afterwards, we're going to invite Meredith to share some final comments, insights, and inspiration. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared, and you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we've talked about a deadly conspiracy and predatory practices that attract children to vaping and the highly addictive drug nicotine. We've asked Meredith to give us some insights, inspiration, and some final comments. I want to ask you, Meredith, though, I have found that some kids really get angry when they think about the conspiracy and a corporation targeting them. And is that something you're finding as well out there? Does this give parents a reason to work with their kids? Because kids don't like to be duped.
You know what? That is so interesting that you say that. In fact, for my own son, who had tried Juul and did not enjoy the quote head rush that these kids get when these enormous amounts of nicotine hit them, and you can be addicted so quickly. He was angry because he realized that there were, at least in the case of Juul, these, Stanford University graduate students who starting this company who were making billions of dollars by addicting him and his friends. And I agree with you, kids, on the old Peanuts cartoons, you would hear the Peanuts gang, hear the teacher, and what they heard was this, wah, wah, wah. So I agree with you that kids don't like to be duped. And that is a way in for some kids. Another thing, we created one youth-focused program in response to parents desperate and saying, my kid doesn't care when I say it's bad for your lungs, it's bad for your heart. But this generation, we all should, but this generation in particular is very focused on climate justice and the harms of the harms that our society is doing to the environment. And so we created a program called Vapes Are Trash. And you can check it out, vapesaretrash.org. And the idea is to teach kids about the dangers to the environment from single-use disposable vapes. As I said, so many of those products are coming in from China, where I just want to add, flavored vapes have been banned. And so those companies come here through the borders and from online sales, et cetera, easily accessible because they're exploiting our own regulatory enforcement failures. So it's about the single-use disposables. It's an insane number. There was just a report from PIRG, Public Interest Research Group, that showed some crazy thing like 4 million of those vapes a week are thrown away. So there's the single-use disposables. Liquid nicotine is an EPA, it's an environmental hazard. Child labor on some tobacco farms. There's a whole bunch of social media information for youth. So we find that is a positive way if kids can understand, make the connection themselves. If these products are so harmful for the environment, what are they doing to my personal environment? So I think it really depends. I want to wrap up with this one thing. I think it really depends on talking to your child. And only a parent knows how their child will receive information, which is why it's so important to go onto our website, parentsagainstvaping.org, go to the section on how to talk to your child about vaping. And the answer to that is early and often. Most parents will say, "Are you vaping?" I mean, I don't know about you, but my kids would be like, "No." And even if you find something, "No, that belongs to my friend." I even heard a state attorney general say, "Well, I went after Jewel because I found it in my house and it was belonged to my kid's friend." And I'm thinking, you really bought that? Seriously? But he was doing the right thing. But the point is, it's having an open conversation with your kids. What does it feel like when you go to the bathroom? I hear kids are vaping in the bathroom. Do you find that? When you go to a party, are a lot of kids vaping? How do you feel about that? You want them, and then maybe they don't want to talk about it then. Then you back off and you try again later. You want them to know that we're talking about addiction and children and the predatory behavior of an industry that wants to make them lifetime customers for nicotine and other products. And so if they have a problem, they know you will support them. You will partner with them. You will partner with your school, right? We support alternatives to suspension, restorative practices rather than punishment, which doesn't mean that there are no rules. It doesn't mean there are no consequences. It means we don't punish children for addiction. We partner with our children to help them beat an addiction. So I think talking to your kids, educating yourself, knowing the signs, talking to your kids in an open way, letting them know that they can come to you or you will support their going to another trusted adult if they're struggling with this kind of addiction. Those are the most important things you can do. We hope that we can provide the education and the support for parents and the empowerment for parents to help themselves and their children, to help change the laws, and to support a push for more research. There's currently not an FDA-approved treatment plan for adolescent addiction to nicotine. And as marijuana, it becomes federally legal. We see this here in New York, the intersection of the renegade retailers illegally selling, in this city, for example, or where I live, flavored vapes are illegal, but they're everywhere. Where I live, marijuana is legal, but sale of it has to be licensed, and people are illegally selling cannabis. And we see every store that is illegally selling cannabis is selling illegal flavored vapes. All of these are things that parents need to be aware of. And I really appreciate so much, Peter, all the heavy lifting you have been doing to protect young people and families and public health for so long. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on today and talk about vaping. So thank you so much for having me.
And I thank you for joining us, and thank you all for watching today. Check out our website, ahealthyiowa.org, and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.